How's it going? It's a Slayer here. Thanks for joining me today as I bring you another Mortal Kombat video. So this came out of like the discussions in one of the online forums that I initiated. So here you see I shortly displayed the Arcade1up machine stick for the retro Mortal Kombat games, and right now I'm just you're just seeing a clip of my gameplay on it, which I'll elaborate on and demonstrate again later. So the purpose of this video is to form a view. We know that in competitive gaming they use the D-pad controllers, or some people may have mechanical keyboards for pro sports, but I wanted to form a view because I know that the conventional arcade controls are more useful for Street Fighter and Tekken with their diagonal inputs. So we're kind of curious as to when Mortal Kombat was a big hit in the 90s, and even today when we've got Arcade1up, which tries to emulate the retro machines, although officially, that how does it fare with a joystick, and which is better, the D-pads or controllers used for competitive gaming, mechanical keyboards, or these arcade joysticks. So, and we've split this into chapters for reference. So here right now I'm demonstrating the setup of the Arcade1up machine, which contains 14 retro games from Midway, including Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. This is 2 years old. The new one of this also has MK3. So here we are playing Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and look at my finger positioning. And it took me a while every time I start a match, even if I win, to get Sub-Zero's freeze right with the diagonal input and then do his combo. So right now I'm controlling both players. Just to give you a demo, I'll shortly get into the matches where you see how well this fares in a more aggressive setup. And here right now I've got what is a fight stick. It's a Gamesir fight stick that I plugged onto my laptop, and it's similar to the arcade sticks for Tekken and Street Fighter. As you see here, it has a bigger circular knob, and it's more meant for diagonal movement. So all this is definitely not the best for MK. I tried it at home on MK Trilogy, and although it worked well, some of the final fights didn't go as well as they did on the keyboard, which is funny because the directional input in this one doesn't suit MK. And it's quite an interesting comparison, as you see, to the one on the MK machine. They probably understood that. So both on this Arcade1up and potentially on the Midway one in the 90s, you saw their joystick was a bit thinner from the top and had like a oval kind of a coated knob, which was narrower, because the way to use these joysticks is to do a click based movement, because there's a very subtle difference between the back forward directions and the diagonal movement. So and here we are back to the Arcade1up machine. So you see it's actually labeled. There's very precise back and forward, up and crouch movements. If you're even slightly off, it will go into a diagonal movement. So that's one thing to be careful of. And now here I'll get into one of my most challenging fights, the fights against the final boss Shao Kahn in the arcade. I'm using the same technique that I've demonstrated in my prior videos on this arcade machines, and I'm quite proud of it because it's different from what everybody does, and I kind of came up with it myself. Like, I bait him with a low fireball and he does an upper shoulder charge that misses, and there is a very narrow window of time wherein I have to shift between the low fireball and the uppercut without accidentally standing up or crouching. And it's easy to get this wrong, though in the arcade it takes several attempts, but sometimes when you get it right, you get a flawless victory. Like, I got it right front up and then on a challenging mode, and then for this video I shot it at an easier difficulty, but suddenly it became harder because these games were designed to take your money, so sometimes they leveled up. But my point here is, if you see my finger movements on the arcade controls, they're almost perfect, not quite there, but 10% of the time the MK arcade stick could move with the kind of fluency and do moves that are not easy to pull off even on the keyboard or controller. But around 80% of the time, even if you got the movement almost right, it only responded 60 to 70 or maximum 80-90% of the time at all difficulty levels. And while the controls for the buttons for the special moves move well, and the diagonal inputs moved faster than keyboard, your more precision based move, like shifting between the low fireball and uppercut, or doing moves with, say, back forward something. And here we finally beat him. I always record proof that I beat this dude because he's the toughest fight in the arcade. So yeah, coming back to that, so on these joysticks, those more precise movements are pretty tough, the back forward ones and stuff like that. So here we've got Sub-Zero's fight against the sub-boss Motaro. I'm quite glad I used him this time because normally there are only two or three characters that I can use on the final fights in the arcade, but this time I leveled up to use Sub-Zero. But of course, my first round where I did those deadly promos wasn't recorded. Once I realized this fight is going good, I recorded the final round for you, but you can see hints of my potential and the kind of combos I could do there as I won this round anyway as well. So that's the thing. Now in terms of the arcade input, now you see here, initially I start badly in this endurance round with him, but I go on to win this round and I do well. The problem was that when you have a special move like Sub-Zero's Ice Ball, which is down forward low punch, you need a very precise control on that down forward movement to allow to avoid making it fully diagonal, and often you end up teabagging or jumping up. But once you get it right, there are moments where you can do it multiple times. So I mixed that with I baited them with his ice clone, which is down back low punch, and then I got them forward with a down back that low punch freeze and down forward freeze, and then I went up and did the combo, and it actually went a bit faster than seen here. But although this could eventually work at any difficulty level in the arcade, in a competitive scenario like today, like if you're playing pro sports, it would be pretty hard to. And here you see that, yeah, I actually got my names on the arcade machine, but yeah, like a throwback to the 90s. Never really played much in the arcade in the 90s, but managed to get it here. So I'm like, ooh, probably like a call from the president or something. Yeah, sure. And this is a brief demo of that of an arcade fight. But my point on the joystick was that in a competitive scenario, it would be pretty tough. As we see here, I'm back to that demo of the stationary opponents, and that no matter how precise I get my input for certain back forward movements, although this machine is 2 years old, its new one may be more responsive. For certain ones like down forward, low punch, or back forward, those were surprisingly harder than the keyboard. Though normally controllers or arcade are a bit better, you could still scale them up to win. But the problem is that in a competitive, because in the old MKs, sometimes you found that if everybody pressed their buttons, things slowed down. Here, in a more difficult setting, even if the opponent is far away, certain moves were, took time to pull off in succession, though it's pretty rare. Like, look, eventually you do win the match, but my main thing is that it's probably, while the MK arcade controls are arcade joystick is a bit better in directional input compared to conventional arcade joysticks, which are designed for like Tekken and Street Fighter. It's still probably not up to the mark for competitive play, but it's really good for good fun at the arcade at any level. And yeah, so in terms of competitions, I would rate the controllers or the mechanical keyboards that people use as the best. And in terms of convenience, given that I'm like a 90s kid, I love the convenience of the keyboard the best. Like, I'm really used to playing it on the keyboard, though sometimes certain moves aren't responsive. And in between those and this keyboard, and after those, I would probably rate this arcade stick. Like, these arcade controls are damn good fun, though they're a bit spread out for my hands. But yeah, they are pretty awesome. And as you see here, that the start of each fight, because when you play, like if you do three, I did 4 arcade runs tonight, and out of every four, 3 of them are perfect, but every fourth one, the controls stutter a bit, or it happens like in 1 out of 4 fights, you still win, but it's not as smooth as you see in those typical YouTuber videos or on the consoles. So, and here we have a comparison of Mortal Kombat 3 on the PC, which I'm playing with the keyboard, and it's a totally different dynamic. Although, of course, in the arcade we played Ultimate MK3, which is a more enhanced version of it, but here on the PC, you see that it's got a different dynamic. While the keyboard is easier, the kind of moves that work are almost similar or slightly different. But yeah, it was a totally different dynamic on the keyboard. It's a different thing that you probably need a controller in the modern games for participating in competitions. But yeah, there you have it. So it's a pretty good experience on the whole, and I think it's still enjoyable in the arcade. And when they first designed it in the 90s, the original Midway machines and these Arcade1up machines from a few years ago, which are like smaller official emulators of those, aren't exactly emulations but are using the main MK source in a smaller machine than the midway ones with controls modeled over them. They seem to have been designed with reasonably good joysticks, which are still fun. That in the arcade, at times it does get frustrating in some of the final boss fights that you need to repeat, but that's more due to the variability of the challenge amongst the bosses. And sometimes I wonder that you never really have your camera on when it matters. That there was one arcade fight against Jade where she was really cheap and she kept on spamming her invisibility or transparency move where she sparkles and everything goes through her. I lost quite a few fights, but then I came back and did a double flawless victory against her in an endurance round. I'm like, damn, I should have recorded that. And I'm glad I got my Sub Zero fights in, though they were faster in person. So this was an interesting combination and kind of question to decide as to what is an ideal controller for these. So let me know your thoughts. Do you like the arcade sticks of old, or do you prefer the controllers like the professional gamers, or are you somebody who likes playing these on the keyboard? It's quite an interesting question to check out, and I'll have some separate videos on the overall arcade experience with MK and how it's still good for the arcade and how it compares on newer versus older tech. So that's it from my side. Let me know your thoughts. Cheers.